Hello, so my name is Dr. Dwayne Wright. I'm the native of York, Pennsylvania, PhD from University of Georgia. Where is our history? Our history is everywhere around us. What we need to think about is that we have history that is not known. We have sometimes history that is the master narrative, meaning that we often hear about the Dr. Kings, the Rosa Parks, but oftentimes we don't talk about the history that happens at places locally, like Harrisburg, York, Pennsylvania, that were critical to the civil rights movement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and then what led me to sort of want to delve into local history. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a native of York, Pennsylvania, graduated from York High, William Penn Senior High School in 1990. Went off to Kutztown University to study secondary mathematics, and then I got a first teaching job at Student High School in Maryland, Prince George County. Went back to Kutztown, got my master's, and then taught in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and then started my doctorate program down at FIU in Florida in international ed development, and then got into transferred to the University of Georgia, where I got into history of education and foundations. And I took a class called Civil Rights in Small Places under my advisor, Dr. Derek Ulrich. And he challenged us in that class to come up with ideas for projects to do our papers on. And I told him, and he's a Southern from the South, from Rock Hill, South Carolina, and his perspective was often jaded from a sort of Southern perspective, as also from at the higher education. So I challenged Dr. Ulrich one day in class and said, hey, Doc, there's some things that were going on in the North that we're not talking about. And I said also some things that were going on at the high school level that's not talked about in the history. So he said, you know what, you have a great idea, and he sort of challenged me, and that's where I focused my project on student activism and agency in the 60s. So this year, 2018, is the 50th anniversary of the 1968 Black Pride Day, where students walked out of William Penn Senior High School after Dr. King was assassinated. But it's critical because the students this year had the March for Life, as well as the National Walkout Day. And a lot of students didn't realize that there were student protest movements that happened prior to, so it's very fitting that we sort of look at what was going on. So the impetus of the moment in York was the assassination of Dr. King, as well as some of the issues that went on. Now, in the United States at that time, there was a lot of injustices that took place, so students recognized that they couldn't participate in certain decision-making bodies at school. There was a brother who was a janitor. His name was Mr. Frank Spells, and the students were upset that they didn't give him the due respect by calling him Mr. Spells. They would just call him Frank. So they was disrespecting a man who had children, who had a critical position in the school, and yet they weren't giving him his respect. So they had a host of issues that the students were talking about and wanted to raise. So the night Dr. King was assassinated, these students were meeting outside of the school amongst themselves to develop this sort of Black Pride Day, which they already had planned on doing. And then Dr. King's assassination was sort of the catalyst that sort of made that thing happen. There was a student who was a 10th grader, and his name was Louis Woodyard, and he knocked on his door and said, you know, the seniors, please do something. We have to do something because Dr. King was assassinated. So they decided the next day, April 5th, 1968, that they weren't going to attend school like they regularly would. So they went into the school that day. Then they went to the principal and told them that they were going to meet in the auditorium and have a black-only assembly. And at this black-only assembly, they came up with a list of demands, as well as talked about Dr. King's life and what he meant to them and to the community. So they sort of celebrated his life, but also came up with some demands. Some of the demands included they wanted to implement Negro history in the curriculum. If you remember, that was what African Americans were referred to as Negroes. So they wanted Negro history. They wanted the school to hire more teachers. They wanted to hire black cafeteria workers to include black food into the cafeteria lines. They wanted Mr. Frank to have a better position. They wanted to allow blacks to have positions on various committees at the school, decision-making bodies. So they also wanted the school to implement the Temple report. They had a report that was published by a group out of Temple, and they looked at some of the injustices in York. So some of the students that were involved in this movement were all seniors. At the top there's Ms. Barbara Malky Woodard, Ms. Wendy Woodyard, Reggie Ellis, Ms. or Dr. Deborah McMillan of the Trail at that time, and they were critical in the movement to make things happen. And all the students had, even though the students were together, they had a variety of philosophical views. Some want the students to be more sort of violent or following the sort of Malcolm X camp. Some wanted a peaceful protest, which they ended up doing because they didn't want the violence to distract from what they wanted to do. So the students came up with their demands. They presented them to the school board, and the school wasn't really excited about it. There was even some negative backlash. In one newspaper article from that time, they said that the school will now have to fumigate the auditorium because the blacks were in there. They were trying to say that they would bring roaches and other insects into the building. So there was some sort of negative feedback, but for the most part, the students were able to change. They did include Black history in the curriculum. They did hire more more teachers. They also had students who were elected to the student senate the following year. It should also be noted that in 1967, they had their first black homecoming queen, Miss Linda Woodward, and that was another event that sort of pushed the student to be more progressive. So what I am attempting to do is to highlight events like the 1968 Pride Day. We had a celebration in New York on the 5th of April of this year, and we had a number of students reflect on their experiences, and also had the school board present the students a proclamation where they made April 5th Black Pride Day across the school district. So we have a lot of work to do. Hopefully this type of information can be part of the curriculum or part of the community so they can be more aware of what's happening, because it's students who often make the change happen, just like we'll see the students who are leading the change for gun control and safety in our schools with the walkouts and the protests that they're pushing, just as it was students in the 60s who were advocating for change and made change happen. So we have to continue to encourage our students to use their voice to make change happen, because change will only happen is when we sort of press our issues and our demands and go forward. So we have any questions? So why is this important? It's just important that we make history part of our local history, part of the curriculum, because oftentimes we get tired of hearing the same story, Dr. King, Rosa Parks. So this allows folks to connect, is making the curriculum relevant to their lives. They may have aunts and uncles who might have been involved in different things. So some of the parallels that are between 1960 and what's going on now, it's all about social justice. We still have issues of inequality that's going on in America. So we have to continually try to fight for social justice, because as Dr. King said, any injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. So we have to make sure we are including the pushing for social justice, whether it's for rights for students, gun control, funding for our schools. We see a lot of protests going on now, a lot of these states where teachers are involved. So we see students out protesting for equality. We see teachers out in Arizona, Colorado, and other states wanting, West Virginia, wanting equal pay and the correct funding for schools, because oftentimes funding gets cut in our schools. So these teachers are now advocating for change as well. All right, so we are, again, the history is important that we include stories of local events into the curriculum, into the fold, to make it part of the narrative of African American or just history in general, so that everyone feels a part, and again, so you feel students feel connected to what they're learning about, and again, they can see, and they might have relatives who may have had a part of what went on, and also encourages them to want to make change happen by being activists themselves, and sort of to carry the torch forward, just as young John Lewis carried the torch what Dr. King was doing, and we see the young students like from Parkland, Florida, the teachers in the states across the country trying to advocate for social justice and change in America.